I learned the hard way that, in my family, my silence was never seen as strength, only proof that I didn't matter. The night my sister laughed at me in front of her fiancé, calling me the safest person she knew. Something inside me cracked in a way I couldn't tape back together. She had no idea what my silence had buried. No idea what it had saved. No idea who I really was. But he did. And the moment his eyes landed on the small pin I never meant to wear in public, the color drained from his face, like he was staring at a ghost he once owed his life to. My name is Ariana Foster, and that was the night my family discovered the one truth they were never meant to know. Returning to Colorado Springs felt less like coming home and more like stepping back into a role I'd never agreed to play. The cold mountain air sharpened every thought as I climbed out of the rental car, bracing myself for the familiar pressure I always felt here. I had come for Lily's engagement dinner, though the truth was, I'd spent years preparing myself for the ways that night could go wrong. The front door swung open before I even reached the steps. Laughter spilled out first, warm but selective, bouncing off the timber walls of my mother's house. Lily appeared in the doorway, practically glowing. Yet the brief hug she gave me barely registered compared to the way she lit up when her fiancé stepped up behind her. Bryce Carter was the kind of man people naturally gravitated toward, and my family had built an entire narrative around him before I even arrived. Inside, conversations swirled around me without ever touching me. My mother fussed over flower arrangements and appetizers, eager to impress the Carters. Everyone else moved with an ease that made me feel like I'd shown up to a gathering where the cast list had already been finalized. I stayed near the edge of the room, letting the noise settle. That's when Bryce's gaze found me again, steady, assessing, caught on the small gray pin at my collar. It was only a second, but something shifted in his expression, something that made my stomach tighten. I hadn't planned on drawing attention, but in that moment, I realized attention had already found me, and none of them were ready for what came next. The engagement dinner played out like a perfectly choreographed performance, with Lily positioned center stage exactly where she believed she belonged. Every guest rotated around her orbit, offering compliments she absorbed like oxygen. The Carters were especially eager, recounting Bryce's accomplishments with the kind of proud enthusiasm usually reserved for military ceremonies. Stories of desert storms, midnight medevacs, and carrying injured men across open ground flowed easily, each one landing like a medal pinned onto Lily's evening. My mother leaned in, eyes shining, as if each heroic detail validated something in her. She had always measured worth through proximity to achievement, and tonight she was practically vibrating with borrowed pride. Meanwhile, I filled the silent space Lily preferred me in, subtle enough to ignore, present enough to contrast with her glow. She made sure of it. When conversation drifted too close to me, she redirected it with effortless cruelty, a smile sweet enough to mask the intent behind it. Ariana works in an office, safe, simple, stable. She never has to deal with anything dangerous. Her voice was light, teasing, but her gaze flicked to Bryce with the precision of someone baiting an audience, waiting for him to confirm her narrative. I felt the weight of her performance more than the words themselves. It was the same role she'd cast me in for years. The quiet one, the harmless one, the one who didn't risk or sacrifice anything worth applauding. I smiled, because silence had become the safest armor I owned. No one at that table understood that silence wasn't weakness. It was a promise, a boundary I had never been allowed to break. But Bryce didn't follow the script Lily wanted from him. His laugh faltered, fading as his attention drifted toward me again. More specifically, toward the small gray pin resting against my collar, a detail most people dismissed without a second glance. This time, his gaze didn't skim past it. It stopped. It held. His expression tightened, shifting from casual interest to something sharper, as though he had just recognized a symbol he'd only ever seen buried inside classified briefings. His eyes lifted to mine with a question neither of us could voice. I turned away before he could ask it. Not because I felt threatened, but because I knew exactly how fragile that moment was. The wrong spark in the wrong room, and everything I had spent years containing would ignite. And tonight was not the night for the truth to unravel. Hours later, voices still echoed through the house, but I slipped outside onto the porch, where the cold settled over me like a steady hand. The mountains stretched across the horizon, black silhouettes against a deeper sky, quiet, imposing, honest. I had always trusted the dark more than the rooms where people performed for one another. Out there, memory had space to breathe. I saw the skiff as clearly as if I'd stepped back inside it. The blue glow of monitors, the chilled air humming around banks of encrypted hardware, the steady pulse of thermal imaging sweeping across a valley halfway around the world. I remembered the shift in the data, a faint, unnatural pattern hidden beneath a curtain of interference. Most would have missed it, but instincts sharpened by repetition, loss, and countless near misses pushed me upright in my chair. Havoc 2 was flying toward it. The radio buzzed with casual updates until my voice cut through, restrained but undeniable. Redirect now. 4 seconds later, the trap lit up on the map, heat signatures blooming like a warning flare exactly where they would have passed. 4 seconds. That was all that separated survival from disaster. I never learned their names. I never expected thanks. The work existed in shadows, and shadows were never meant to speak. But tonight, inside that brightly lit house, something had shifted. When Bryce laughed politely earlier, I'd noticed the insignia stitched above his pocket, a designation I'd seen before, one linked to that operation, linked to that team, linked to that night. Recognition washed over me slowly. Then, all at once, the pin on my collar, once a private reminder of what I'd carried, had become something far more dangerous. I had saved him, and he was beginning to understand exactly who I was. The Carter dinner the next evening felt like an unveiling rather than a family meal. Their mountain house glowed under warm lights, every walnut surface polished to reflect just how much they valued appearances. I was placed at the far end of the table, out of the conversational spotlight, but close enough to witness the spectacle. Lily was radiant beside Bryce, guiding him into every heroic story as if she were curating his legend. Bryce once saved a recon team. They almost didn't make it out, but he got them home. She said it loudly, glancing at me as though waiting for me to shrink. I took a sip of wine instead. To Lily, every story needed a hierarchy, and she was determined to put me at the bottom of it. But the first fracture appeared when Bryce didn't respond with the expected bravado. Newt, that won. His polite smile held, but his eyes drifted toward me again, lingering too long for simple courtesy. It wasn't curiosity. It was the slow click of recognition. My mother urged him on, adding that I could never truly grasp how demanding his work was. Bryce's expression flickered, and Newt, that too, came quietly. He set his knife down with a precision that carried tension, not annoyance, a tiny sound of metal on porcelain, yet unmistakably the reflex of someone reacting to an unseen fault line. Then his father turned to me, asking if I handled paperwork or document sorting. Before I could answer, Lily swooped in, dismissing any possibility that my job could hold weight. She emphasized how shielded I was from real danger, smiling as if the words tasted sweet. Bryce's gaze cut toward her, a brief look of restraint, not that 3, and then returned to me with a question lodged behind it. I answered simply that I worked in analysis, offering nothing else, but the twist was already in motion. As the room buzzed with conversation, I felt Bryce studying me not as an acquaintance, but as someone he was trying to place on a battlefield he had survived. And that was when I knew the conflict had begun to surface. The tension between us thickened until it became impossible to ignore. Bryce adjusted his collar, then launched into a story that sounded casual to everyone else. Back at Corbett Pass, we lost our navigation in a wind shear. Good thing remote support fixed it before we hit the ridge. To them, it was a harmless anecdote. But note that 4 hit instantly. Corbett Pass wasn't dinner conversation. It was a classified operation, one I had supported from behind a wall of encrypted monitors. And the way he said remote support wasn't casual. It was a challenge. His eyes locked onto mine. Waiting. I placed my glass down and replied calmly, giving him the exact answer only someone with higher clearance would know. If low winds erased the markers, thermal override kept enough illumination for the airframe to avoid collision. The table remained blissfully unaware, but Bryce froze. The wine in his hand shook. His breath stuttered. I had just revealed knowledge above his rank, something he could not ignore. In that silent exchange, Bryce understood I wasn't who Lily claimed I was. He understood he had once followed a voice he never saw, a voice now sitting across from him at his own family's dinner table. And the real story between us had finally begun. Dinner split itself into two realities: the cheerful facade the Carters performed effortlessly, and the razor-thin silence stretching between Bryce and me. I could feel him watching, studying every movement, as if trying to pull my face from the haze of a night he barely survived. Lily misread everything. Of course. She always did. She tossed her hair back and laughed loudly. Ariana works in an office. She doesn't get battlefield stories, but she sure can write reports. A few guests chuckled politely. I rested my hand against my knee, steadying my breath. But Bryce didn't laugh. He angled slightly toward me, speaking low enough that only I could hear. When you said thermal override, you knew exactly what you were talking about. That wasn't chance. Before I could reply, Lily cut in with irritation simmering beneath her sugary tone. Bryce, don't be so intense. Leave the military talk to the men. I was content to let the moment pass until Lily reached for the gray pin on my collar. She pinched it lightly, giggling as if she'd uncovered something trivial. What is this? Something you bought online? Like a little military cosplay. The room snapped when Bryce moved. His chair scraped violently as he stood, gripping Lily's wrist midair. His voice dropped into a dangerous register. Don't touch that. Conversation died instantly. Lily blinked at him, startled. My mother stammered his name, unsure whether to scold or apologize. Bryce didn't look at her. He looked at me, directly, deliberately. The question that had been flickering behind his eyes now solidified into certainty. The person who wears that pin isn't who you think she is. Lily! Confusion twisted across her face. No one else understood the symbol she had just mocked. But Bryce did. The fear and respect battling in his expression shifted the entire tone of the room. He drew a slow breath, struggling to contain the weight of what he now knew. Are you who I think you are? Were you Overwatch actual in the SEW? He didn't finish. He couldn't. Classified operations didn't belong at polished dining tables. The atmosphere tightened until it felt combustible. The moment he voiced that question, the dinner crossed into territory no one else in the room was cleared to enter. No one moved, no one breathed. Lily looked at Bryce as if he'd suddenly begun speaking another language. Why are you talking like this? Bryce finally turned to her, calm but unyielding. Because that pin isn't decoration, and you touched something you shouldn't have. The room froze. Even the fire crackling in the hearth seemed to quiet. Bryce straightened unconsciously, heels together, shoulders squared. Not the posture of a fiancé at a family dinner, but a soldier addressing someone above him. In 2017, there was a voice on the radio guiding us out of an ambush. That voice saved my entire team. My chest tightened. I had prepared myself for this, but not in front of an audience that had spent years deciding who I was allowed to be. His eyes locked on mine. I found out today that voice was you. Lily's jaw dropped open. My mother's fork slipped from her hand. Mr. Carter leaned toward the table as if bracing himself. Wait, are you saying she outranks you? Bryce bowed his head slightly, an answer more powerful than words. She had the authority to overrule a colonel when our lives were at risk. We carried out the orders. She made the call. Every gaze in the room snapped to me, the woman they had dismissed as harmless and unimpressive mere minutes before. Lily shook her head, teetering on denial. No, she has nothing to do with the battlefield. Bryce turned to her with a clarity that cut deeper than anger. You see the surface. Ariana sees the world from a height we can't imagine. Silence tightened until it felt like glass. Then Bryce lowered his head again, not as Lily's fiancé, not as the celebrated pilot, but as a man who knew the debt he owed. Thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here. With that single sentence, the story my family had written about me for 20 years shattered, quietly, irrevocably. The room didn't simply go quiet after Bryce thanked me. It froze, suspended in a kind of disbelief that felt heavier than any argument could have been. Every face was turned toward me, stunned, trying to reconcile the version of me they'd constructed with the truth that had just detonated in the open. I stood, not to explain myself, but because the moment demanded I stop shrinking. My eyes met Lily's first. Her expression was a tangle of shock, envy, and a fear she didn't know how to name. "You've spent your life making everything loud," I said softly, "but some things grow more powerful the quieter they are." No one responded. They couldn't. Bryce remained standing as well, shoulders squared, offering a slight bow that held more meaning than any speech. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't ceremony. It was gratitude from a man whose life I had saved without ever meeting him. That single gesture restructured the entire room. Lily was no longer the star, my mother no longer certain, and I, no longer invisible. I reached up and straightened the gray pin on my collar. A small motion, yet it echoed like a shockwave. For years, silence had been my duty. Tonight, it became my power. After the climax settled, the room filled with questions no one knew how to voice. They sat there like static in the air, humming, pressing, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to break the silence. It was Bryce's father who finally spoke. "So, what is it you actually do?" I lifted the linen napkin, dabbed my mouth, and placed it neatly beside my plate. The motion was deliberate, final, a signal that the conversation had reached its limit. "I'm not permitted to say. I never have been." My mother blinked, confusion and hurt wrestling across her face. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I met her gaze without anger. I had spent years grieving expectations I'd never meet, but not tonight, because even if I had told you, you wouldn't have believed it. Lily shot to her feet, eyes glassy, outrage trembling in her voice. "You always do this, always acting mysterious, always acting like you're above everyone." I turned toward her, calm in a way that only truth could make me. "It isn't mystery, it's responsibility. And not everything is about you, Lily." Her breath hitched, the words landing harder than anything I could have shouted. The room fell silent again, the kind of silence that swallowed ego whole. I rose from the table slowly, not in defiance, but in acceptance. "Thank you for dinner. You don't have to understand me. I never did this for recognition." Bryce lowered his head, voice steady but weighted. "We're grateful, even if others don't understand why." I nodded to him, not as a superior, not as a savior, but as someone who once guided him home through a night he barely survived. Then I walked away from the table, away from the swirling expectations, the quiet dismissals, the years of minimizing jokes and tilted comparisons. In that moment, I closed a door, not the one leading out of the Carter home, but the one that kept me tethered to their approval, their misunderstanding, their limited idea of who I was allowed to be. The lock clicked shut inside me with quiet certainty. I had freed myself. A few weeks later, my life settled back into its steady rhythm. The hum of servers, the cool, recycled air, the familiarity of a windowless office where daylight was just a rumor. The world outside spun with celebrations and dramas I no longer felt tethered to. Inside the skiff, everything remained unchanged, and yet something in me had shifted for good. One afternoon, a sealed parcel appeared in my secure mailbox. Lily's wedding invitation. The envelope was elegant, her name embossed in gold beside her fiancé's, but the note tucked inside wasn't hers. I recognized the handwriting instantly, precise, disciplined, unmistakably Bryce. To the voice who guided us home. "A seat at the head table is reserved for you. With respect, I read it slowly, letting the weight of each word settle. Then I folded the note and placed it in the drawer where I kept the things that mattered, not because anyone else valued them, but because I did. I didn't go to the wedding. Not out of spite, not out of pride, but because I no longer needed to step into a place that once asked me to shrink just to fit their version of me. That evening, instead of sitting in a banquet hall filled with flowers and speeches, I stood on the barracks balcony, looking out over the distant shimmer of the city. No applause, no music, just the cold wind brushing past me and the quiet hum of a world that didn't know my name but felt safer because of it. Silence had always been the language of my life, the duty that bound me, the barrier that kept me unseen. For years, I believed it was the tool my family used to make me small. But now I understood. Silence was my strength, my terrain, a space I claimed for myself, free from expectation or misunderstanding. Lily had her spotlight. Bryce had his medals. My family had their stories, the ones they clung to even when they shattered. And I had the truth, a truth that needed no audience, a truth that stood steady, even when no one else knew where to look.